Hello, everyone. My name is Julie, and I am here with Mary Beth Spann Mank. Hello, Mary, and welcome. I'm so glad you could join us today. I am really excited about our conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Julie, for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here talking about a topic that's near and dear to my heart.
Yes. Well, before we get into the topic, would you mind sharing just a little bit about yourself and maybe a little background info?
No, sure, that would be great.
Okay.
Well, my name is Mary Beth Spann Mank, and I am almost 70 years old.
Mm.
I was born in 1953, so I am 68 years old, and I'm saying that because I'm a life master. I know
Yeah.
everything about life now.
Well,
My everybody's life I think has some certain themes to it. My theme seemed to be one of reunion because I was born in Dublin, Ireland, but
mm,
I was adopted when I was about a year and a half old. So obviously I have no Irish accent or anything, and raised by a family in Buffalo, New York. And then I married early when I was about 23. I married a nice young man, but the marriage didn't last and we parted amicably. And we then I had a second marriage to a lovely man, and we have two children together, two young adult children. But he and I also parted ways
mm.
years ago. It's almost, oh my gosh, it's almost 20 years ago that he and I parted. But when we parted ways, we had owned a big home together, and we sold that home and bought two little houses across the street from each other. So he and I
Oh,
continued to have a lovely
wow.
uh, friendship. Yes, even to this day. I just spoke with him a little while ago. So
Nice.
that all worked out. But what happened in my life that was really one of the most significant things with the theme of reunions is that I reunited with my high school boyfriend from 35 years earlier, Paul Mank.
Oh my goodness.
And
Okay.
yes, so I was living on Long Island, living across the street from my ex-husband. And Paul was living at the time in Battle Creek, Michigan. And it's a very long story because it took years, but finally my kids were old enough and we were able to be together. And I moved to Battle Creek to be with him. We had a long distance relationship for
Wow.
about 8 years. And I wouldn't say difficult, but the first two marriages obviously were not meant to stay together. But my relationship with Paul, my romance with Paul was just effortless. You know,
Mm,
people always say you have to work on a relationship. We really didn't. We just got along so easily and beautifully. And so finally, I went to move with him, but I wasn't even with him for 1 year before he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and passed. And so there I was in Michigan, and yeah,
Mm,
so it was a very a difficult, obviously difficult transition when you finally your romantic dreams come
mm.
true, and then cancer comes into
Wow.
the scene. So from there, when a lot of times when people have someone very close, near and dear to them, whether it's a romantic partner, a spouse, a child, someone like that, a lot of times that's when people really open up to the idea that maybe there's an afterlife.
Mhm, absolutely.
Maybe there's something beyond. And it's because the idea of never ever seeing this person again is so traumatizing. It's so horrific. It
Mhm,
just makes you feel like you can't even go on. You're just, at least for me, it was just
mm,
physically, emotionally, mentally, everything just so painful. And the pain just
mm,
doesn't go away, it increases over time.
mm.
But going back to before Paul and I were connected, when my second husband and I started to come apart at the seams, even though we're very friendly and care about each other, it was still painful. A divorce is almost
Sure.
always very
Of
painful. And we had two
course.
children, and I did not want to visit divorce on them.
Right.
And I was so sad and so upset. And I started investigating ways to hold myself together, for lack of a better word, to hold myself together so I could be there for my kids and for myself. And I began learning more and more about these esoteric topics, things like law of attraction
Mm.
and things like the afterlife and how our consciousness lives on and all of these things. So back then I had already set the groundwork. I went to a meditation class.
Okay.
Every month, I lived outside of New York City. So every month I promised myself I would go in once a month to a class and learn about some aspect, not only of the afterlife, but about how we live on. So
Mhm.
I had all of that under my belt when Paul became ill.
Okay.
And so I felt like looking back on it, it was unknowingly I had prepared myself for this, really traumatic juncture when he passed.
Right.
And I think I did a good job of it. I think when people pass, when people die, it's common for the people who are still on earth to angst about, I should have done this, I should have done that.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, the regrets. And
Of
it doesn't
course.
seem to matter how close they were and how happy they were before the person died. The regrets come into play.
Mhm.
And the right after Paul passed, right after that, like the next day, that happened to me. And I said to myself, because I had laid this earlier groundwork, I had said to myself, I'm not doing that to myself. I refuse to beat myself up anymore. Going through cancer and going through his death were bad enough. I'm not going to add a layer onto that. And that comes from my belief. And I know a lot of people think that law of attraction is silly, but I, for years, listened to Abraham Hicks. And
Mhm.
they say the most important thing in your life, your only job really, is that you feel good and that you turn your attention to
Mm.
thoughts and experiences and people that help support you in that. And the reason they say that that's really important is because when you feel good, when you're feeling really good and happy and uplifted and you wake up with a song in your heart, when you're feeling that way, you're most connected to your eternal self. And
True.
they don't label things as being good and bad. In other words, if you're feeling down or depressed, that's not a bad thing. They call that contrast. There's contrast. There's feeling good and feeling not so good. And the not so
Mm.
good, they equate to, for example, when you're going driving down the road and your car kind of veers off and you hit a rumble strip on the side of the road, is all it is, the feeling bad part is just a reminder to whoop, get back in the lane that you want to be in.
Get back in
And
alignment.
yeah, exactly. So after Paul passed, of course I felt terrible. I mean, I can't even describe the pain of it.
Mm.
And people who have been through it, they understand it. But I mean, I basically almost lived in bed for a year and a half afterwards.
Wow.
I felt like a train had hit me. Actually, a better analogy is when Paul was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he said to me, I have pancreatic cancer, which is one of the deadliest cancers. I felt like a wrecking ball hit me from the front. And the whole time he was ill, it sort of hung back there behind me. And even though we focused on making every moment count and having it be precious and wonderful together, I knew it was there. I knew eventually that was going to swing the other way,
Mhm.
and it did.
Yeah.
But even though I spent all that time in bed, I mean, I did get up sometimes, of course. I did on purpose. I followed Abraham's advice that I had listened to, which was to do every single thing I could to make myself feel better,
Mm.
because they teach that when you feel better, if someone you love passes, if you feel better, it's easy for you to interpret them without your ordinary human senses.
Mm.
And they call the time of grief, that interlude right after the person passes until you begin to feel better, they call that just an adjustment period, because you can no
Okay.
longer interpret them with your ordinary human senses for the most part. You usually can't see them, you usually can't hear them, you usually can't hold their hand and touch them or hug them. And of course there's exceptions. Sometimes, people have these extraordinary experiences, but it's not the same as when they were physically focused. So you really have to work on yourself and help elevate yourself to feel better, so it's easier for you to interpret them
Mm.
with senses that are kind of maybe you didn't even know you had, or kind of, like a little rusty. And that's kind of where I met up with William Murray, who was another interviewee that you had on your show. And I have never met William, but he and I met online in a different group, a Facebook group. And he had similar experiences to mine in the sense that his beloved wife had passed.
Right, right.
He also, he has a bit of a different path, of course, but he had done a lot of the similar things that I had done in terms of laying groundwork so that when his wife did pass, he knew how to
Right.
begin to recover from that to the point where he has no grief. And that's the way I feel now. I don't look back. I don't say, oh, I wish Paul were here. I wish, I don't lament about the times that we had together, that they will be no more. I don't even think of those thoughts are not even with me ever.
Wow.
I think of my life as being now, right now, where Paul is with me, and later when, of course, I pass, and then it will be way easier for me to interpret him because we will be, together in the same kind of experience. So in the time after Paul passed, what I did when I laid in bed for a year and a half was I read almost every single book that I could get my hands on about afterlife, near-death experiences, shared death experiences, all the books by mediums, all the different topics that told me, that informed me that Paul did not go anywhere. That's what Abraham says. Abraham says, your loved ones went nowhere. They are right with you. They are more with you now than when they were physically focused. And they're just a thought away. And in that investigation period, when you look into things about the afterlife and all of these topics, there are topics that did not interest me. For example,
Okay.
I'm not interested in aliens personally. It doesn't mean there aren't aliens. It doesn't mean it doesn't interest other people, but those kinds of books were not of interest to me at all. I was not interested in anything dark or negative
Right.
or scary. So I
Yes.
just avoided any of that. I just avoided all of that. And
skip over that part, right?
Well, I do that in my regular life anyway. Like I never ever watch the news. I haven't watched network news in 20 years on purpose. I don't watch it
Right.
because it's focused on fear-based things.
Sure.
And people accuse me of putting my head in the sand, but I'm still here. I tell the people in the group, William and I started our own group, and I tell the people in the group that I'm just focused on, unicorns, and I'm a puppeteer, puppets and lollipops and rainbows. I love everything happy and glittery and sparkly. And I'm just really here to make myself feel good. And believing that Paul is with me now, believing that we will have another reunion. I had the reunion with him on Earth, and then that we will have another reunion. Oh, and the other thing was that Paul was instrumental in having me have a reunion with my biological Irish family, my birth family. And we traveled over to Ireland and met them all when Paul was still physically focused. And
okay. Yeah, physically focused. That's how you put it. That's interesting.
I hadn't seen, but well, he's still alive, but
right.
I hadn't seen them in about 5 years because I was busy with moving across the country to be with Paul, and then he became ill. The day after Paul died, the day after, that my Irish relatives were on the phone and said, come, let us take care of you. So that's been such a beautiful, it's just that I'm like the luckiest person in the whole history of the world. And my kids are supportive, and my kids, and my two young adult kids, they really cared for Paul. Paul was welcome into when we would have family gatherings with my ex-husband and his parents. Paul was welcomed in, he was brought right in. And so I'm very fortunate on all of those fronts.
Nice.
William and I started the group originally. Our group is called Love After Life. It's a Facebook group for people who have had their romantic partners, spouses pass, and who do not want to repartner because there is a great deal of societal support for people who want to repartner. And some
Mhm.
people feel that that's really, the only way to move on, to,
Right.
blah, blah. So there's a lot of support for that. There's less support for people who do not want to do that. And there's nothing wrong with either. It's just they're just two different choices. Neither one is right or wrong. I mean, it's just whatever's right for you.
Sure. Yes.
And I'm older, so I don't, first of all, number one, I don't really care if people tell me to move on. I know what I know. I know what's best for me. But I think it's more difficult for younger people.
Oh,
If
of course. Mhm.
we have almost 1,000 people in our group, which I guess as Facebook groups go is kind of small.
Mhm.
But we've heard every single story imaginable. We have people in their 80s in our group. We have people in their 20s in our group.
Wow.
We have all sorts of configurations, and people who deal with a lot of family pressure or social pressure
Yeah.
to repartner.
Mhm.
And we, again, we don't see anything wrong with it. I want to make that really clear that if people repartner, that's up to them, you
Right.
know. But there were not really many groups for people who didn't want to repartner. And William and I both believed it's possible to live grief free. Now we've also realized that in our group, William and I have talked about this at length, that for some people, maybe grief free will never be their choice. Some people are a little more are more comfortable having a little bit of grief because they feel it's like a way to honor their loved one. They feel like it's a lifeline to their loved one,
Mhm.
you know. And so we don't try to talk anybody out of it, but
Okay.
it is possible. It's not, you see a lot of memes and greeting cards and things that say, grief is forever, a piece of my heart is ripped out and all that.
Right.
And it's just not true for me. I really honestly don't have any grief. And as William and I have talked a lot, and he's kind of a mentor to me because he's a little bit further ahead than I am about these things. But he said to me one time something I thought was so wise. He said, here's the way I look at it, Mary Beth. He said, if I die and everything goes black and there's nothing, there's no afterlife. He said, it's not going to matter. There's not going to be anybody there saying, ha ha, you were
True.
wrong. He said, but if I'm right, which I know I am, and my beautiful wife is there,
Yeah.
then all you have to curate, all you have to take care of is the time between now and when you pass. That's it.
Yeah.
Another gentleman, Brian Smith, who is very prominent in the afterlife world and helping people with grief, he told me that once. He said, Mary Beth, all you have to manage is between now and the time you see Paul again. That's all.
Right.
And that made it seem, much more manageable.
And you're doing a wonderful job, it seems,
Well, thank
at
you.
managing. I mean, how long, remind me, how long has it been since he passed? Since he's
Paul passed in February of 2016.
okay.
So in that first year, aside from staying in bed and reading books, I pushed myself. I forced myself to do other things that would make me feel better, I think. I took tap dancing lessons for a couple of years. I
Wow.
I volunteered in a classroom with little kids, which so I made myself get up and get dressed once a week and go and spend a day in a classroom with little children because that always it's almost impossible to be grieving around little kids. They're just so precious. And I
Exactly.
joined, yes, and I joined Toastmasters,
Uh-huh.
a local Toastmasters. I went online, and it turned out the Toastmasters in Battle Creek the meeting was held in a very large, beautiful building that they call the Federal Center in Battle Creek, which is where Paul worked. And so when I went there and joined Toastmasters, I met people. The Toastmaster, I mean, the building held thousands of workers, but the Toastmaster meeting maybe had 10, 15 people at the most.
Mhm.
And I met the man who had the office right next to Paul's. And so,
Mm.
so many things happened from that. And I was able to give speeches about what I think about the afterlife and being with Paul and, signs and symbols and sensations that I've gotten from him that reassure me that he lives on and he's with me. So that was very much a gift. And so I did things like that. And then founding the group was also helpful because it was nice to be with somebody like William, who was not into repartnering at all, and who also was feeling better and better and better about his relationship with his wife.
Right.
So that was good.
Right. Wow. It's so amazing. You're such a joy. And you
Oh,
still
thank
work
you.
with kids. You were saying before earlier, do you still work with children?
Yes, well, I work online with kids. I teach online, and then sometimes I go in person. I'm, like I said, I'm a puppeteer also, and so I bring puppets with me and do storytelling and things like that. So,
Wow.
yeah, so that's a lot of fun. I did want to share one thing that I didn't tell you about. I know William shared a number of, like almost metaphysical miracles that he's had, like
Yes,
really
he's
intense
had some
experiences.
quite amazing experiences.
Yeah, I haven't had anything like quite that outstanding, except one thing. And I think this was really a moment of grace. So Paul, in the end, was very ill with cancer. He had times he lived with the cancer for 18 months, and he there were times when he did well and times when he didn't. It was inoperable, and so in those situations, they just have to give you, chemotherapy, and they switch it up every so often to keep you on track. And so he had times where he was ill and times where he felt like almost himself.
Mm.
But in the end, he was very, very ill, very ill. And he wanted to go to hospice, which we found a beautiful place for him. It was very beautiful. He was only there a day and a half. He was so ill. That's how ill he was at
Wow.
the end. And I was holding his hand when he was dying. And I don't know about you, but I had never been with a dying person before in my whole life, ever. And he was sitting there, he was kind of out of it, and he was sitting there and breathing slowly. And like I noticed, different signs that this was it.
Mm.
His fingernails started changing color, things like that. Not to
Mm.
get graphic, but it was just kind of, it wasn't horrible. It was just like a shutting down. I could
Mm.
tell this was it.
Mhm.
And the moment he passed, he just like sort of exhaled. And in that moment, I sensed the energy whoosh out of the top of his head. And I'm not talking a little sensation. I'm talking like whoosh. And it wasn't a breeze, and it wasn't anything that I saw or heard. I can't even describe it other than to say it was so enormously pronounced. And it was a big whoosh.
Right. I mean, I imagine if it sort of impacted your own energy, because from what I've heard,
I guess.
our auras and whatever, it extends out and around our
Yes.
body. So,
So it just was a moment where I went, oh. And anytime I
wow.
worried, like maybe he's not there, I have to go back to that. I think of that as a moment of grace. And
Mm.
I've talked with, since then, I had never, the interesting thing too was that I had never heard of that before. It wasn't something
Oh,
I had read about because I wasn't in my reading phase yet.
okay.
When Paul was alive, we just really focused on everything positive. Spending every minute together, enjoying each other. The love that we
Nice.
felt from the cancer time exploded. It was just enormous. And then it got even bigger after he died. So I had not read anything about your energy leaving out through your crown chakra or anything, but after that I did. And my daughter is a nurse, and she told me, she said, Mom, her hospice nurse friend said those kinds of phenomenon are quite common
Hmm.
in hospice. An energy leaves through the chest or an energy leaves through the head. And so that's I guess a common thing in the nursing, in the hospice
Hmm.
nursing
Right.
profession. The other thing that happened, which was interesting, was that I about four different people who didn't know each other from different places told me that their loved ones who had passed came back to them, complete, full, real, uh, you hug them, solid, real people, and they talk to them, and then they
Oh,
disappeared again. And generally speaking, the people who told me these things, they would say, well, I never told anybody this, but, and then they would tell me because they knew I would be open and receptive to it. And
wow.
so these are just, friends and people who really did. So I think that there's many, many stories that people do not tell.
Oh, for sure.
And I
And
think that, even though I was interested in all of this, esoteric kind of law of attraction stuff and all that, and I thought, yeah, there's life after death, but it didn't really impact me until Paul passed.
mm,
But I also know a lot of people are very, 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 very uncomfortable with the topic of death and with the
true.
topic of passing, and they just want to ignore it and not think of it at all or talk about it at all.
And why do
But
you think that
the funny
is?
thing is, Julie, when I started reading, I'm thinking, how come I didn't see these books before? I read hundreds of books. Where were they in my life before? They
Right.
just popped out of the woodwork. I
Not
would
something
buy
they
a book.
teach in school.
Yes, I would buy a book on Amazon, and then below it, it would suggest 10 more. I couldn't get enough of these.
Yes, right.
I
Starts
think
opening up.
for a lot of people, I think their only connection with what happens after we die is religious. It can come in the religion. And I was raised Catholic, and they never talked about you're going to meet your departed family in heaven. They never talked about that. All it was that when you died, if you led a sin free, well, if at the moment you died, you were sin free, you had confessed your sins. If at
Mhm,
that moment you were sin free,
mhm.
then you could go and be with God. That was the promise, that you could go and be with God. And when I was a
Right,
little kid, I wasn't thinking, well, what if my mother dies? Can I be with her too? I mean, I just didn't think along those lines at all
right,
until Paul passed. And then it became, really concretized in my experience. Like, where is he? What happened to him?
right.
That kind of thing. And yeah.
Why do you think people don't talk about it? Um, or that they shy away from the subject matter? What do you think that is about our culture?
Well, that's kind of interesting too, because William and I in our group, we brought on two other people as admin. Um, uh, and one of the admin, Kim, her name is, I don't know if I have the permission to say her last name,
That's okay.
but Kim, we were talking about this one time, and I said, why wouldn't anybody want to believe that there's an afterlife? Why would anybody think that this is all there is? And some people who, even if you lose, I shouldn't say lose because I don't think of it as a loss, even if you have your beloved, most beloved, precious soulmate sweetheart die,
Hmm,
some people just think dead is dead.
hmm.
And I was talking with Kim about this, and I said, why would anybody think that way? And she said, because if you allow I don't mean to speak for her, so I hope I get this right. If you allow the possibility that there is life after death and your beloved lives on, then you're also flooded with a lot of doubts. And you constantly have to fight off the doubts and the fears. And what if I'm wrong? And what if this? And is this a sign? I don't know. Maybe this is a sign. Maybe
Hmm.
it's not a sign. I haven't gotten a sign. I don't feel anything. He got something. He saw something. How come I'm not seeing something? And people drive themselves mad with that.
Oh,
So it opens up kind of a Pandora's box, so to speak. And it's easier sometimes for people just to say, that's it. I'll never see that person again. It's just sometimes easier
for
for them to think that
closure
way.
to who knows? They think they need to do that maybe to move on. Can you
Yes.
hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah, I don't know. There are definitely, I've realized throughout my life that there are some people, it's just here and now, physical, no afterlife, don't want to talk about spiritual things. And that's just maybe how they've always been. But I feel like I've from childhood, and I didn't really grow up in a religious home, but from childhood, I've always been intrigued with a there's something bigger, there's a God, there's somebody out there, or there's spirituality, surrounding us. I just always had that for some reason, that feeling since childhood. And I was growing up, I'd bring the subject up or here and there, and it just was not received. I was not very received very well, and it would puzzle me. Like, why is this not more? People don't find this interesting, and they're like, Julie, get back down to earth. Your head's up in the clouds, and that kind of a thing.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, and getting back also to the religious thing, because I was raised very strict Catholic. I remember when I remember this so clearly. It was when I was 10 years old. And I know when I was a child, no one in my family passed. I mean, the only loved one that passed was a dog, and of course we were sad. But my parents didn't die early. I mean, I didn't have any of those, early tragedies or anything. But it was Christmas morning one year, and my sister and I, we of course wanted to wake our parents up early to see what Santa brought, and we raced out into the living room. And it was the year was not, I remember this so clearly, it was 1963, and we both got Barbie dolls. And we got a Barbie kitchen. My parents would buy us each, well, Santa would bring us each things, and then we always had toys to share. I think it was to encourage sharing, or my parents didn't want to spend the money for two identical things.
Oh.
So anyway, we were playing with our dolls and playing with the kitchen, and my mother was in the kitchen, making dinner, and the smell of the Christmas dinner and the tree. It was just like such a perfect moment. And then she got us ready. Okay, girls, we have to go to mass. And so we had to leave our Barbies, and we had these beautiful dresses that my aunt had bought us, matching dresses. And we had to put on our, snow gear, because I lived in Buffalo. And we go to the church, and we did not live we lived right near, we didn't live in the housing project, but we lived right near a housing project. And so people in my neighborhood, they were working people. They didn't have a whole lot of money, but that morning, everyone, hi neighbor, it was just perfect. We go into
Nice.
church, and we're singing the hymn. And I remember thinking, oh, this is so beautiful. Everything is so wonderful in my life. And then the priest got up on the altar, and he gave the homily, and he said, Christmas is not about the Christmas tree. It is not about your Christmas finery. It is not about the presents beneath the tree or the toys. It's not even about the dinner that you will share with your family later today. Christmas is to remind us that if we lead a good life, when we die, we will get to gaze upon the face of God for all of eternity. And I remember thinking, I was sitting with my family thinking, and I had this very wicked thought. And I thought, no offense, God, but I love you and everything, but I don't really want to gaze on your face for all of eternity. I would rather play with my Barbie dolls. But I couldn't tell anybody that, because, I thought it was like a very, very sinful. And now, of course, as an adult, I understand the priest is trying to say it's not about materialism. But at the same time, I think that all of those beautiful things were infused with love, and God is love. That's the only thing I took away from my religion. God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him, whatever God is. And so I think that for the most part, people, I don't know, I can't speak to other religions, but in Catholicism, when I was a kid, we never talked about, meeting our family in heaven, or don't worry, or they might say, well, they're looking down on you. That's a common thing even nowadays. But in my travels after Paul died, one of the most significant things I came across, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, is the Leslie Flint work, the work of Leslie Flint. I don't know if you know about him.
I have heard.
Yes. So I don't even, well, I think it was from the Zamet. Victor and Wendy Zamet have an Afterlife newsletter they put together. They've been putting it together for over 20 years, and they send it out,
Yes.
online. And they had a clip from one of Leslie Flint's seances. And for those who aren't familiar with Leslie Flint, he was what they call a direct voice medium. He did not channel voices. He wasn't there to like interpret things that your loved one would say from the other side, but he would sit in seance, and voices would come into the room, and he could talk with the people as well, the spirit people. And there was this couple, Annie and Dinshaw Nanji, and she was from Sweden, and he was a doctor of chemistry from India, and they had gotten together, and they were married, and very, very had a long enduring love. And she died very quickly. And he was so grief stricken that he traveled the world trying to find someone who could help him, and finally came to sit with Leslie Flint. And in sitting with Leslie Flint, he came to Mr. Flint a couple times a year for almost 15 years. And Annie, his wife, came through and talked to him and told him so much about the afterlife. And at one point, he was a big romantic, and he at one point said to her, oh, my darling, when I see you again, will I be able to kiss you? Will you feel my kiss upon your lips? And she said to him, oh, my darling, of course, I am more solid and real than even when I was on earth. And so the idea that she's solid and real and she does things, she's learning art and they have work and they have a home, and that
Hmm.
it's so solid, something to look
Yes,
forward to was so comforting. I found that very, very comforting.
absolutely. I've learned a lot in the last couple years, and that's something that people who astral travel have talked about, that there is what they call an astral earth, but I guess they don't call it that over there, but we call it an astral earth, and this is really the copy. And yeah, that when our loved ones cross over, they often will get acclimated, start building a home. Some I've heard stories where, friends have gone over and they're building this home with rooms and this on a beautiful lake, and leading, it seems like just a beautiful life on the other side, and waiting for other loved ones to join.
Well,
I found that amazing.
yes, Dinshaw, the husband, he makes me laugh because in the group we talk about them sometimes and we say, wow, can you imagine going somewhere and sitting even like a couple times a year, and then you can actually talk with your husband or your girlfriend or whoever, and you can hear their voice and you can talk back and forth with them. And even though he's doing that, Dinshaw's like, oh, remember when we used to walk under the moonlight? Like he's already talking to her and he's lamenting like what he believes he doesn't have anymore. And she says to him so many things that are so interesting. She says to him, any experience that we had together on earth, we can recreate here.
Hmm.
So
Right.
when people in our group say things like, oh, I miss my husband and we used to go to the movies every week, and I say,
Right.
you can have that, it's not gone forever. But
Right.
what William and I have talked about a lot, along with our admins, Kim and Samantha, who are fabulous, what is the fact that we can focus on what we lost, what is not. I mean, Paul is not here physically with me at all, of course, and initially that felt like a loss. But if you focus on what you still have and what you have to look forward to,
Mm-hmm.
and you use all these resources to support this from now until I die, that's all I have to manage, then it's like you're living this really amazing existence. It's almost magical.
Mm-hmm.
So many things have happened that are just magical. And I believe I attribute them, things like that to Paul. And somebody said to William, well, how do I know that the feather that I saw on the ground is from my loved one? I think it's a sign. Maybe it's not. I don't know. And he said, well, here's what he does. And I picked up this tip from him. He said, if I see a sign, I just attribute it to my wife. And I thank her for it. And I figure when I die and I get to have a full blown conversation with her, I can say, hey, did you do that? And if she says no, we can have a good laugh over it. But
Good perspective.
now and then, that really helps. The other thing we do, which I don't know if William mentioned this, maybe he did, is a lot of times people say, oh, I don't have any signs from my loved ones. And sometimes people are more quiet than other times. But we say, well, don't wait for them. Give them signs.
Mm.
Write them a letter. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, do things for them. Set up a little shrine in your home for
Right.
them. Yeah. So on our anniversary, sometime, not with COVID so much, but earlier, I would take Paul, I would put a picture of him on my phone and take him to a restaurant and set the picture up and order dinner. And I would always tell the wait staff, oh, this is my husband. He's invisible, but, and sometimes the wait staff will say, oh, my grandmother just died.
Mm.
How do you know that? And so sometimes I think people are really hungry to hear this, but they feel
Yes.
embarrassed talking about it.
Yes. Well, and it's hard because until you have some experiences yourself, it is very difficult for us to believe, and the more I've, the more I personally experience, the more I hear, I love hearing about other people's experiences because that helps me and my own personal life. And it really kind of snowballs that it almost brings more experiences to my life by hearing others. So I hope that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this channel, to be interviewing people like you, is to bring hope, and hopefully also that will increase their own personal experiences with whatever it is that they're, could be a loved one, or it could be other things. Maybe they're trying to develop psychic abilities or mediumship abilities, or astral project, my interest these days. I know we're running out of time real quick here, and I don't want to leave anything out. I guess so please share anything else that you think might be helpful.
Well, I'm not a medium. Oh, excuse me. I didn't mean to
Oh, no,
interrupt.
go ahead. No, that's fine.
I'm not a medium, and I have no designs on becoming a medium. I guess, everybody has some sort of, mediumistic tendencies. I went to a workshop with medium Patrick Matthews, who I like very much. And Patrick, I like him so much because he's very positive, and he works with his sister Kathy. But he is one of the few mediums, I read his book, where he said some people are perfectly content with their partner in spirit. Other people want to repartner. So he's like, whatever floats your boat. But I went to a workshop with him, and he had everybody do this little exercise where I didn't know the other people. There were only 15 participants, and he paired us up, and with a nice looking. I was sitting across from a pleasant looking woman, and he said, just quiet your mind and just write down whatever words come to mind. And I looked at her. I mean, of course you could see her physically, so you get clues from just looking at someone. But I guess, I don't know what I guess. She worked in an office, and I guess maybe she liked to garden. I mean, I was just kind of pulling things. And the final thing that came to my mind was Wheel of Fortune. And so I wrote that down. And then Patrick said, okay, everybody, pencils down. Now I want you to share your list with each other. And a lot of the things, they were kind of generic-y things. I'm guessing you're a mom, you have kids, you like to garden. And oh, yeah, yeah. And then I said, well, the last thing here is kind of crazy, but it's Wheel of Fortune. And she said, oh, Wheel of Fortune. I love that show. I tried out for that show 3 times.
Oh my goodness.
I was like, oh, I should quit my day job. So I do think that people have, mediumistic. Everybody has some sort of level of whatever, and you can develop it. But there were also things I tried that I just found were frustrating for me. I tried automatic writing; it didn't feel real, and I just sort of chuck these things. I mean, I don't call myself a failure or thing. I just think, oh well, that's not for me, and I just always focus on what really feels the best for me.
Yeah.
So I make time to visit with Paul, concerted time to visit with him. I think imagination is God. I think we're imagined life forms. And I think that what we imagine comes true for us. It's proven to be so for me. So that's how I manage all of this. And I feel very, very fortunate that so many people have come to our group and have.
Yes. And we will link that to the YouTube description.
Yeah. They've just benefited, I think, from just being in a group where nobody's going to raise an eyebrow, about them wanting to be.
Yes.
Like, I feel completely married. I feel completely, I mean, people say to me, like, you go to a doctor's office, are you married? I said, well, yes, but of course you won't think so because my husband's invisible. They're like, what?
Well,
anyway, so that's
one last thing is, well, two last things. Current projects that you might be working on, and how people or the listeners can connect with you. And then, of course, we'll try and put all the links in the description.
Yes, well, my current projects, I'm working on 2 things, 2 books. One is a book about the Nanjis, Annie and Dinshaw Nanji.
Oh.
I did translated rather some of the recordings, which are more difficult than you think, because in those recordings, there's many people speaking at the same time. They talk over each other. Sometimes Leslie Flint chimes in, and a recording that's 30 minutes long can literally take days to transcribe. Ooh. And so I spoke with Carl Jackson Barnes, who's the curator of the Leslie Flint Trust website. And by the way, that's all free. You can go on there and listen to anything for free. That was the whole point of it. And I said, I'd like to do a transcription of all of the Nanji recordings, And he thought that would be, I'd be half one foot in the grave by the time I was finished because it would take forever. So we agreed that I would listen to all of them and take notes and make a summary of each one for people like me, especially who have a beloved, romantic soulmate sweetheart who passed. So I'm working on that. And then I'm also writing a book about how to think yourself grief free, because I really think that the key to
Nice.
feeling grief free, if you want to be grief free, it's not for everybody, but if you really want to be grief free, I think it's just a matter of practice of constantly turning your attention in grief free directions. A lot of people who come to our group will say, I'm so sad I lost my husband of 53 years. And
Mhm.
I'll say to them, with all due respect, may I gently suggest you not say you lost him. Imagine he's standing right next to you and you're
Yeah.
telling people he's lost. So but I don't want to deny their pain. And as William said to you, the grief is a gift because it elevates the love so much and just makes it that you will never take that person for granted ever, ever, ever again. Because you remember that it
Yes.
slices and dices you. So those are the two book projects I'm working on. And of course people can connect with me through the group, Love
Okay.
Afterlife. And my email is MB for Mary Beth, MB Spann, SP as in Paul, ANN at AOL.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
I know it was a chatterbox.
No, I mean, I had questions and you kept answering them. So I'm like, oh, well, I don't need to ask that question. I don't need to ask that question because you
A
just
friend of mine said,
you knew my script. You knew what I was going to ask.
a friend of mine said to me, Mary Beth, every time you talk, you're blah, 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 and then you go, oh, and another thing.
But it's all very well organized and in order and wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I really didn't have to do much
Thank you.
work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We all have so much to look forward to. It's all here right now. And it's even going to be experienced more fully when we pass. So no rush to get there. It's all there. It's all there for everybody you know and love. Even people who you see struggling, it's just a journey. And we'll all be perfectly fine. We're all already perfectly fine.
Lovely. Well,
Thank you
thank you
so
so
much.
much. And everyone listening, thank you so much for listening. I hope this was helpful to you. And we wish you a wonderful day or evening wherever you are on the planet. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.